what a lot of people think, mostly subconscious, is that the Bible has a lot of secret hidden layers. For a lot of times, even in academic theology, they say that you can't do theology if you are not a Christian. When we talk about what people think when they look at us, like Bible scholars, they think that we think that the way to unlock the Bible's codes is to run it through a filter of ancient Near Eastern religion. That's not what Bible scholars think they're doing. They're not filtering through foreign religion to try to find a code. They are trying to develop the skills to read, because it turns out that that's a lot more complicated than people who have only ever seen an English Bible think it is. We're lucky enough to have the Bible in our own language that we can just pick up at any time and think that we're getting a kind of direct feed of God's words. But that's not really what's happening. Like even in evangelicalism, the doctrine of inspiration is based around the original texts, the Greek and the Hebrew, which, I mean, you can go and pick those up and read them if you want to, but it won't mean anything to you most of the time. So somebody had to translate these things to get them into the form that you can read and quote from that has any meaning for you. Someone translated that, and translation is a highly technical and largely inexact process. I mean, there's the the line that we use when we do this is that translation entails interpretation. We have to make our best guess at what these Hebrew and Greek words mean just to put them into an English form. And it's somewhat mechanical when you do this because grammar works a certain way. People have a pretty good idea how these languages work. But sometimes it isn't. There's things that don't translate in between the language systems. There's things that don't translate in between the cultures. There are Hebrew words that we have no English word for. Some Bibles will just transliterate them. Sometimes people will translate them, but even when we have a word that we know what it means, meaning of words is very highly dependent on the context in which they're used. And this is a property of language. You can't do anything about that. So there might be a word like let's say so the word God, that we know what the Hebrew word for that is. There's a couple of them. We know what the Greek word for that is. We know what the English word for that is. But if we think about what that word actually means, what we think a God is versus what the Greek word theos is, or what the Hebrew word Elohim is, and you get into all of the connotations and the metaphysics and things that go into that, they're not necessarily the same thing. And so what we're doing when we're looking at these comparative sources, these other documents that were written around the same time as the Bible by and for people who we think saw the world and used words, most importantly, used words in more or less the same ways. What we're trying to figure out is what they thought the words meant. And that is part of the process of reading what they said. So we're not trying to come up with insights to break a code into some hidden layers of meaning in the text that you can't get at by reading them by just reading it yourself. What we're trying to do as Bible scholars is it's part of the translation and the reading process. We're trying to look at what these words mean, and if we're saying that they mean something different than what your English Bible says, we're not saying that we found a code that unlocked a different layer or that had some kind of spiritual authority associated with it. We're saying that whoever translated your English Bible translated it wrong, or translated it less accurately, less desirably, in such a way that the words that the impression that you get from the words you read is not the same thing that someone who was reading it in Hebrew back when it was written would have gotten. There's a philosophy of translation. There's actually two philosophies of translation. One of them is the one that I just said, that what you want to do when you translate is that you want to convey the same message, that you want to use words and ideas that have that will make the person who's hearing the message think in the same ways as the person who would have heard it in the original language would have thought. And there's another one that says, no, you just want to transcribe the words and let the words have whatever effect they're going to have, um, regardless of when it's happening. And that second approach is, I think, closer to the an encoding problem, because it believes that the words themselves matter, not the message that the words were being used to convey. Um, Now, ultimately, the Bible that you read is a combination of both. If you want to read a word for word transcription, you can do that. It's called an interlinear. You can look it up on the internet. It's very difficult to read and it's kind of confusing. So, a lot of the times when they translate your English Bible, they will smooth over the grammar to make it read like English reads. And if there's strange idioms, um, or strange ideas, things that are expressed non-literally, they will usually change them. Like, here's a really popular example. Um, a common idiom in Hebrew Bible is that Yahweh is long of nose, um, which that's what the words literally mean. It translates as patient. So whenever it says Yahweh is patient, that's what it means. Um, and that's an example of changing the words around to convey the message. So there's really a combination of this. But again, it's most important to understand that when we are saying that, no, by comparing these imagery and these words to this other ancient Near Eastern material, that's a way of trying to say what the words mean, what the images mean, what the people who wrote it were trying to say. It's not trying to use a foreign religion to try to access a secret code.